Okay, so hi everyone. As always, welcome to Daytona Office Hours, where we discuss the last releases that happened in the last week, releases we have coming up, our plans for the future generally, and we take a look at what's going on around the repo, around the issues, PRs, and we give a few contributor shoutouts as well. So let me just share my screen immediately. And of course, as always, if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in whenever, and we'll get that addressed immediately. Okay, I'll just zoom in for a bit. Okay, I think we're good. So last week, or actually this week, we had a pretty big release, which I'll get to in a second. Sorry, my bad. The release before that was 0.25.2. This was released on Friday. This was just a patch release with a few fixes, which we can go over, but also probably the most interesting part about this release was that we alpha released a few providers, 3 to be exact. So we released the AWS provider that creates an EC2 instance for you to work in, the DigitalOcean provider, which creates a droplet for you to work in, and a FlyO provider, which creates a FlyO machine for you to work in and to, let's say, host your projects in a sense. There are instructions here how to test these providers, and hopefully we will have them released on Friday with the next Daytona release them fully out of alpha so everyone can try them out automatically. The rest of the fixes for this release were just some lint errors by me. I fixed the dev container read configuration race condition. So this is just a small fix to the Docker provider, actually the Docker lib in our code base. Then a version mismatch warning displays wrong versions. This was just a, let's say, variable swap that was needed in the string that displays this. Then just a fix for saving the stopped workspace state if telemetry is disabled. So we noticed that when you disable telemetry and when you stop a workspace, the actual projects get their states are not stored, so their uptimes are still stored in the database, which is wrong. So we just needed to wipe the configs if telemetry is enabled as well. Then we have home folder fix for installing VS Code extensions. So I noticed that when, for example, you run a dev container with the root user, the extensions would never actually install because we didn't look in the appropriate directory for the code server installation. So this just fixes it to use the user's home directory from the home environment variable. Then we have a fix for .devcontainer.json detection. This was an issue submitted by Nico where one of his repos actually doesn't use the dev container directory, but rather just the .devcontainer.json file, and then this just fixes the detection of that file. Then we have handle binary download interruptions. So one of our contributors actually noticed that if you have an unstable connection while creating a workspace or while downloading Daytona, this actually causes the workspace to fail the creation process because the download will get interrupted. So I just added a few, I just added retries, and also we actually now prefer to use wget instead of curl inside the project, which is more resilient to these kind of interruptions. And then we also removed the log retry logic. This was done by Luca. This is actually this was actually up for removal for a few weeks because we changed we actually changed how we get the logs during the creation process. So this just removes it because it was no longer needed and caused some other issues. A few chores and tests. So we have a chore to add dev environment variables to VS Code launch configs by me. So just a, let's say, developer experience candy for users that like to debug Daytona. I just added the appropriate environment variables to the launch config. And then we also have add packaging guidelines to the repository. Sorry, these guidelines now clearly say what users cannot do when packaging Daytona. And if anyone is interested, you can go and read through the packaging guidelines in the root of the repository. A few notes, nothing special there. And again, the providers that were alpha released last week. Okay, That was 0.25.2, which was released, as I said, on Friday. And then we have the biggest release, probably in a few weeks, which added prebuilds, which I'll get to in a second. Other than prebuilds, we on external contributor, which I think is on new contributors. Yes, so it is Devanshu who added a flag for project config delete command to delete all project configurations. So as we have with delete all workspaces, now we have a flag for deleting all project configs as well. Then I also added support for opening the cursor ID with Daytona. Now users can use Daytona code and open projects with cursor. It will automatically, of course, connect cursor to your project as it does with VS Code. And now everyone using cursor can use Daytona as well. Then we have the big feature, which I'll skip for a sec. Then we have a few fixes, which is clone project from commit URL by John Wick. So this was a big effort from John Wick. This change required a few big changes in how we fetch the Git repository context on the backend, actually. And now the commit URL, if you submit a commit URL that is not from the main branch, now the repository correctly clones on the appropriate branch and checks out the appropriate commit. Then just a fix for the clone infinite loop when cloning from commit. And then we have fixing API errors that return HTML by me. So now this is actually a problem that Nico again noticed, that if something fails on the FRP side, for example, which just dumps an HTML page as the error, now we just store that HTML and display the path to the user so that they can inspect it themselves, because we can't really render HTML in the CLI. Can I get some badge, Nico? Nico, you can make a badge for yourself. So congratulations. Then at chores and test, market directory as safe and dev container. This is just a small fix for by me that adds the, actually we can inspect it. It's an interesting resolution. So this is just one post start command that adds the save directory to the git config, which just makes it easier to run Daytona in Daytona and not to have to run this yourself when you enter the project. And now we can get to the pre-builds part of things. So as I said, this is a big feature with this release, and that's adding the pre-builds, which are basically a way to speed up development by setting a project configuration to listen to changes in the underlying repository. So what this means essentially is that when you configure a pre-build, what we do is we set up a webhook on your GitHub repository, and that webhook tells us when you make updates to the repository itself. Then if those updates match the rules which you set in the pre-builds, which I'll get to in a second, then what we do is we build another iteration of your project, and then it makes it faster when you create that project later on. This essentially makes the creation process for dev container repositories a lot faster, because they are all cached on your machine. And then you can just have to create a repository, and then what we do is basically clone the repository, open the dev container, and that's it. So it takes really, it's a big speed improvement in terms of building the actual container. What you can do now is you can, to use the pre-builds, you first have to have a project configuration. And then you have to add a pre-build with Daytona prebuilds add. I think there's a note here, or it might be missing. Currently, we only support pre-builds for GitHub, but that will, of course, change in future releases. We will update it as we go, and we will support more and more Git providers. As you can see here, when you run Daytona prebuild add, you'll get a few options for the prebuild itself. That's commit interval, trigger files, and retention. Retention is the easiest one to understand. It's basically how many builds do you want to store. So if the pre-build is triggered 4 times, the oldest one will be deleted. Then we have commit interval. This is basically an option that says how many commits need to pass from one build to another for the build to actually trigger. And then we have trigger files, which are paths inside your repository, which then we check if the commit includes a change to that file. If it does, then we trigger a pre-build. So for example, a use case for trigger files is to set it to your configuration file. So for example, .devcontainer.json. And then when you change the configuration, Daytona will automatically build the configuration and have it stored in your machine. Then, as it says here, Daytona create will automatically detect that builds are available on your Daytona server, and then use those builds as cache when creating the project itself. You can also list these builds, or you can run them automatically with Daytona build run as well. There's a few examples here on how these how the webhooks look like as well, and how the interfaces for the build screen and project config lists look like. As you can see here, when you add a new pre-build, you'll see that Prebuilds rules here updates on your project config list. Okay, that's a brief overview of the Prebuilds itself. I can maybe run one create process. Let me just up the font for a sec. Where's the font? Okay, that's 20. Yeah, it's good. Okay, so if I run now, by the way, I'm using main here because we have a small issue that we solved and are going to push a patch fix soon. I'll talk about that a bit later. So if I do Daytona create and I do Daytona, because I have, sorry, Daytona build ls. So as you can see here, these are the builds. If I inspect this build right here, so main build info, this one, you'll see that this build is actually from the Daytona repository, and it uses the detected dev container JSON config. And essentially, this means that I have a build cache stored on my machine, and I can use it. I can use it in a future create. So if I do Daytona main creates rather than Daytona. What it does now, it asks me for the branch which I want to use because it detected a project config. I'll just do the default branch. And as you see in a second, we get a line that says, in a second, okay, I get a line that says using existing build cache. And as you can see, it was very fast. It just used the image from before, and it created Daytona itself. Don't mind the error. This is just some intermittent error because of the way I built the main binary. But essentially, that's it. So this speed improvement will be most noticeable for projects that have large, let's say, large build processes when creating dev containers or building Docker files and images. So this will be a welcome improvement, I believe, for such projects and for Daytona itself, because Daytona is dev container based. As always, with such big releases have come big breaking changes. So as you can see here, we have a few breaking changes to the project config interface, which means that users who had project configs before will have to re-add them, unfortunately. Then we have providers that need to be updated with Daytona provider update, because again, we changed the interface of the projects themselves. We changed one of the URL from get context from a get request to a post request. And then we had a few database migration issues that need to be resolved by either removing the entire config, which is probably the easiest way to do it. You have all the paths here. But if you, let's say, have important stuff in the config itself, you can just simply install the SQLite CLI, which also comes shipped with Mac automatically, and then just open the database and drop the table that's causing issues, which is a table that's actually not even used in previous versions, so it should not be a problem for migrating. That's it regarding Prebuilds. If anyone has any questions about Prebuilds, feel free to stop me here and ask away. If not, I'll just continue on. Okay, let's go on. So as I said, we have a few fixes coming up today, which will be a patch release. So obviously 0.26.1. We noticed a few UX issues that are occurring, and also a fix for actually detecting cached builds. So in some cases, currently, when you create a workspace, we don't correctly get the appropriate build cache. So we're going to fix that very, very soon. Other than that, probably most noticeable is actually getting the logs of a build. So if I do main ls, main build ls, and also one of the fixes is for this right here, because the created and updated fields are not set, but they actually are. So just parsing the time zone is the issue here. So if I do Daytona build logs that and follow, you can see that I have logs of the build itself, but if I do follow, it will follow indefinitely, even though the build itself is complete. So we just added the UX improvement that will automatically actually stop the execution of this command if we detect that the build is complete. So just a small UX improvement that we will release very soon. And thanks to Ivan Burazin for noticing that. So let me just delete this workspace for a sec. Okay. That's it regarding this release and the patch that we have coming up. Regarding the Friday release, so hopefully we will have some of these PRs merged. As you can see, there's quite a few of them. Probably the most noticeable ones are create from sample creation options. So this will add a new option to the Daytona creation process where users will be able to create projects from some sample repositories easily. So for example, if you want to quickly bootstrap a Node.js project, we will have a sample repository for you ready, and then you can just create a workspace really easily from that tech stack. The actual samples index will be editable on the server as well. So you can, if you want, you can host your own repository samples and then use your own in your own Daytona binary. Then we have a feature git commit signing. So I noticed that there's quite a lot of work on this PR. Hopefully that gets merged really soon, and maybe for this release, if not, hopefully in the next one next week. Then we have, what do we have here? So this is probably one of the let's say biggest changes in the CLI itself in the client, because it refactored the output flag to accommodate TUI. That means that now when you run Daytona, if you want to run an interactive prompt with the JSON output flag, it will basically break the output. Now this fixes that as well. So hopefully we will have that ready real soon. And as I said, we have a lot of issues currently open. We just added a bunch of bounties. If we check out the bounties right here, we added a bunch of bounties a few minutes ago, actually, and then you can jump in, solve the bounties, or solve generally any issues on our repository, of course, contribute that way, or contribute to the conversation on Slack. And that's basically it. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me right here, or if not, that's it for this office hours. Okay, I'll stop the recording. If anyone has any questions after I stop the recording, that's also fine. So thanks for being here, and see you next week.